Welcome, dear students. Thank you for choosing Classroom TZ. I'm Mr. Shadrach Swiller, and today we're going to discuss the second topic of Form 3 in history. It's going by the name Colonial Administrative Systems. Topic number 1, it was establishment of colonialism, how Europeans succeeded to establish or to conquer Africans and introducing colonialism. Then after introduction of colonialism in Africa, the second step they done, it was introduction of administrative systems. These systems mainly were used on how to control Africans. So let's check what are inside. First thing, let's check table of contents. What are we going to cover in this topic? Number 1, we are going to check direct rule as the administrative system, and then you will check indirect rule, and also we will check assimilation policy. After assimilation policy, it's going to be association policy, and lastly we are going to check colonial military and the colonial legal institutions. This is our table of content, or the list of things we are going to cover from the beginning up to the end of our topic. So here we go. Let's start with our first discussion. Before going directly to the first administrative system, let it be aware what the meaning of administrative system. They said this were a mechanism applied by colonial administrators to maintain and consolidate colonial rule in their colonies. So it was the methods used by colonialists on how to control Africans. Some sort of political system in Africa, and this political system introduced by European after conquering Africa in the first topic of establishment of colonialism. Also said, because of African reactions, that intensive reaction we checked in topic number 1, how Africans reacted, especially in resistance way, it gave lesson to Europeans, like these people are not the way we are thinking, like we can control them easily. So because of the lesson they learned from African resistance, they said we're supposed to have a mechanism on how to control these people. And that mechanism, it was establishment of administrative systems. So that's the brief of administrative system, the mechanism or the ways used by Europeans to colonize Africans. So our first administrative system we are going to check, it is direct rule system. Direct rule system. It was an administrative system whereby colonies ruled by Europeans personnel in assistance of local agents within the area. Direct rule is used by German in their colonies, but also British applied it in some of areas. Direct rule means that Europeans were directly involved in the colonies rather than other mechanism. We're going to check the example indirect rule where Europeans use the African chiefs. But here in direct rule, as it said, direct rule, it means that European administrators were available in the colonies in all levels. That's why it's called the direct rule. No one worked on behalf of Europeans. But also they said these Europeans, while they were colonizing colonies, they got little assistance from Africans. And the direct rule, those Africans were Akida and Jumbes. Their main work were just to collect taxes, Akida and Jumbes. We are not working on behalf per se of Europeans, but they were appointed to assist Europeans while Europeans were there in the colony. That is called the direct rule. So this method applied by German. Remember that it is German who applied this direct rule, and he applied it in the following colonies: Tanganyika, Burundi and Rwanda, that is German East Africa, Togo, Saudi West Africa or Namibia, and Cameroon. But also, British applied this method in few of her colonies, like Southern Rhodesia, Zimbabwe current day, South Africa, and Kenya. Few colonies. So this is direct rule. Remember, it applied by German, and how direct involvement of German in the colonies. Structure of direct rule. How it was look like. Direct rule, it was like that. And that one is our structure. It is started by governor on the top. After governor, advisory council, district officer, Liwali, Akida, and Jumbes. So from Liwali, Akida, and Jumbes, these were Africans worked together with those whites, governor, advisory council, and district officers to learn colonies. This is a simple illustration showing the structure of direct rule. So you can see top whites, even if a top whites, but at the end here, at the bottom, where you can find the Africans. You should be aware with this arrangement, because there we are going to discuss at the end the weakness and some of demerit of this is European administrative systems. Among of the open weakness, most of the top rank it was covered by whites and the bottom by black, some sort of racial segregation. So that's the structure of direct rule. And the important part of this concept is why direct rule. Should be aware of the introduction, meaning of direct rule, structure of direct rule, and also who applied the direct rule. We checked all those before. Then let's check why German selected direct rule. Number one, to have direct control of Africans. Germany want to control her colony directly. This is to improve or to show effective or to have effective exploitation of the resources. That's why he wanted to have direct control of the colonies. Number two, to stop Boers interference. This Boers interference, it was happening in southwest there in Namibia. When you check the map of Africa, Namibia is so close to South Africa. And South Africa, mainly before coming of British, it was occupied by Dutch or Boers. So once Boers occupied South Africa from the Cape, they expanded territory. They wanted even to take southwest. So to stop this interference, Germany applied direct rule in Namibia. Those days it was called the southwest, to stop the influence or the expansion of these Boers to southwest or to Namibia. German racial superiority. Always Germany, she was thinking herself like the super race. She is strong, she can do anything because of the white color. So this race superiority gave Germany inspiration, like I can go directly to conquer those colonies, and assuming that those colonies, people are living that colonies are weak one, so I can control them. It's just this mindset of superiority. I'm strong, I'm good, I'm able to do everything. Then I can go and conquer, or I can go and control colonies directly. So because of race superiority thinking, she was the best. That's why she applied the direct rule. Lack of experience in colonial administration. Germany, he never colonized any colony before that, especially in Africa. So because of this lack of experience, in order to learn while you are controlling the colony, it was necessary for him to go directly to the colonies. So he went directly to the colonies to gain experience. Why? Because he never had experience on controlling colonies. These are some of the reasons why direct rule, and the others are African reactions. German experienced intensive reactions while he was trying to take colonies in Africa. All of us were aware about Majimaji War. We are aware about hair resistance in German East Africa, Tanganyika those days. These reactions gave German lesson on how or the nature of these people. So because of intensive reaction or strong reactions, while German was trying to impose colonial rule, he said at the end he is supposed to colonize them directly. If before colonization they reacted like this, what if I will trust them and give them power, control my colony? They can overthrow the power. So to avoid further problems, Germany needed to be there in the colony to reduce African resistance. High number of German administrators. Lucky enough or fortunately, Germany blessed with high number of whites and high number of people. Then because of this high number of people, it was not a big deal to go direct the colony because there were so many. And sometimes this direct rule used as a means of reducing unemployment rate in Europe because most of whites came in Africa and they acted as administrators. So those were the reasons why direct rule. Strength. What were the benefits of direct rule? How Germany benefited from direct rule? The good side of direct rule. Number one, it led to the improvement of colonial social services. How? Simply because Europeans settled in Africa. Then, if Europeans are settling in Africa as administrators, they cannot be treated the same as how Africans are treated. These people are coming from Europe, they need good environment, good accommodation, a good house, full of social services. So because of that, social services improved in Africa. Even up today, example in Tanzania, that some of houses are used by government officials. Those houses were the houses of colonial masters in those days, or colonial administrators, white administrators in those days. And when we check those houses, comparing the current situations and before, so it was very very nice design or structure at that time. That's why even up today it's looking good. So improvement of social services happened because whites or these administrators wanted good environment. Somehow not the same clear like Europe, but somehow at least nearby like Europe environment. So social services improved, provision of water service, provision of electricity supply, good housing, and the other important services. Suppressed the African resistance. Also, direct rule suppressed the African resistance or stopped African resistance. Why? It was difficult for Africans to resist again. First of all, they resisted in introduction of colonialism, and unfortunately they failed. At that time, while they failed, Germans were present in the colony. And then Germany conquered the Africans, established the administrative system, and Germany still in the colony. So it was difficult for Africans to resist while they have experience of before. We tried, we failed, and now still our enemy is inside in our place. So it was so difficult for Africans to resist again. In that way, direct rule solved the issue of African resistance because it created fear to Africans. Like if we are going to resist, we are going to face the same consequence like what we faced during the resistance of imposition colonial rule. Reduced the unemployment to Germans. How? Because large number of Germans came in Africa as administrators. So most of those Germans who came in Africa as administrators, in a simple way we can say they were unemployed people in Europe and they dumped in Africa as administrators. In that way it solved the case of unemployment rate in Europe. Those were the strength. The weakness, the opposite side of the coin. The weakness of direct rule were the following. One, it had the element of dictatorship. Direct rule, it was harsh, it was brutal. Germans guided the Africans, I can say, with the hands of iron hands. It was very, very brutal and cruel way of guiding people. In that way, Germany created a lot of enmity or high level of enmity between Germans administrators and the Africans because it had element of dictatorship, direct exploitations of Africans. Language barrier. This system explains the language barrier because Germany contacted with Africans directly, and then the time Germany contacted with Africans, communication. Africans, they never knew German language or English. The same Germans, they never know African mother tongue or vernacular language. In that way, it created the barrier of communication during the administration. Expensiveness of the system. It was expensive to run the system because of high number of whites. The more you have high number of whites, the more they need good accommodation, good environment, good salaries. So Germany incurred high cost, and that cost, it was mainly to save those administrators. Compared to other form where we are going to check there, Africans were used on behalf. Africans received less of you, sometimes even free, by only giving a gift. So Germany incurred the cost, or it was expensive direct rule because of favoring or ensuring good service to those administrators. And these administrators were Europeans from Europe. These were the weakness of direct rule, element of dictatorship, language barrier, expensiveness of the system. By saying so, we're done about direct rule. The second administrative system, it is indirect rule. Indirect rule. Direct rule, it was under German, and here it is indirect rule. By introduction, indirect rule, it was an administrative system used by British to govern their colonies. It was called indirect due to the use of local chiefs on behalf of whites. Local chiefs received orders from Europeans and imposed them to Africans. So here in indirect rule, first of all, it was used by British, and how British applied this, it is through African chiefs, local leaders. Local leaders learn small areas of the colony or some part of the colony like local government, and those local areas or local government learned by or led by African chiefs. In that way, African chiefs were there on behalf of European. So because local chiefs learned the area on behalf of Europeans, it was called the indirect rule. Not direct, we are seeing Europeans governing there, no. In indirect, African chiefs were the leader. It was a like system as shown on the picture, and Frederick Lugard, the first person introduced this system in Africa, and it was applied first in Nigeria by Frederick Lugard, but in Tanganyika it was applied first time in 1925 by Donald Cameroon after First World War, when Germany lost in the war and those colonies taken under trusteeship council, and British given Tanganyika. So when British took Tanganyika after First World War, Donald Cameroon in 1925 introduced the indirect rule in Tanganyika. The first person to introduce this in Africa, it was Frederick Lugard, and in Tanganyika it was Donald Cameroon. Remember, it was under British. And the right side here, we are seeing that the structure of the indirect rule system starts with the governor. Left and right, we have colonial advisory on African affairs, and there it is Government Executive Council. From there it's Legislative Council, Provincial Commissioner, District Commissioner, and Chiefs and Headsmen. This is a simple illustration or simple introduction of indirect rule. Key terms: it is who applied it, British. Where in the colonies, and who the first to introduce it, it is Lugard and Donald Cameron in Tanganyika. Why indirect rule? Why British applied the indirect rule? Number one, to reduce administrative learning cost. How to reduce the administrative learning cost? Because here we saw few number of whites but high number of blacks who are working on behalf of Europeans. So since day one, Europeans were exploiting Africans. Even these chiefs who were working on behalf of Europeans to control local areas, some of them or most of them were not paid salary as full. It was low wages and some sort of gifts. In that way, it was easy to learn or cheap to learn it, because those administrators, they need less or few amount of money in running the system. And also here there were no issue of good social services or good housing. African chiefs keep living in their own life, but some of smaller gifts. So it was cheap to run it, because chiefs, they were never need salary or payment. Physical difficulties, another reason why indirect rule. It is because of physical difficulties. At the time when colonialism it was introduced, Africans, it had physical barriers. It was so hard to access to the interior. So if it was difficult to access to the interior, how can we run the colony? Let's use those administrators who are living to the interior. Those administrators, they are going to work on behalf of us. So in that way, it was easy to run the colony and escape the physical difficulties. Language barrier, different language. British, they are speaking English, while Africans, they are speaking more than one language. So how are we going to communicate with them? Let's use their leaders to communicate with them. So because of language barriers, they opted indirect rule to use African local chiefs. Those African local chiefs know the language of their people. To win African mind. How to win African minds is by using African chiefs, and the African chiefs received orders from Europeans and going to implement. When the African chiefs are implementing these orders, Africans knew that orders come from their leaders, not from Europeans. So in that way, it was easy to control and to win African minds, because Africans trusted their local leaders or their local chiefs. And most of what local chiefs said, it was from Europeans. Because of this gap, Africans never knew like these things are coming from Europeans. It was the winning situation to Europeans. They won African minds by using their leaders, African leaders. To distract African unit, by using local chiefs, it was divide and rule. These local chiefs are not living at one place. They are coming from different local areas, and every local leader get different orders. So in that way, it was difficult for these local leaders to sit down together and discuss how they can go against the Europeans. So indirect rule, it was a mechanism to divide the Africans and to control them, to distract African unit. That is why indirect rule. Another issue is large number of colonies. British got many colonies in Africa, and not only in Africa, even out of Africa. So in that way, he lacked the number of administrators or administrator personnel. So the solution, it was to use African chiefs to solve the problem of or shortage of administrators personnel. Why shortage of administrators personnel? Because of large number of colonies, many colonies in Africa and even outside of Africa. Strength or ponderance or benefit good side of indirect rule. How indirect rule was helpful to British? Number one, reduce the African resistance. How? Africans trusted the local chiefs, and it was difficult for Africans to resist their local chiefs. So anything that said by local chiefs, African accepted. In that way, there were no room for resistance because of the trust built inside of Africans to their leaders. And hence the effective exploitation of African resources. Now the issue it is British gained all resources, all they wanted by using African chiefs. In other language, we can say maybe these African chiefs, they betrayed their people, but maybe because of ignorance those days. Minimize the running costs. As we said before, it was cheap to run this system because those African chiefs were not paid salary fully as other officials. Maintain the African administrative system. This system also keep African administrative system. They never disturbed the system found there in Africa. That's why they applied the local chiefs. On the other side, we have weakness of indirect rule. The weakness is poor management of colonial revenue. The revenue were not managed properly because Africans, they lacked knowledge or education of controlling this revenue, as we were the ones who sometimes collecting taxes, so it was difficult to control them because they lacked knowledge on how to learn those revenue. Created a gap between local chiefs and common Africans. Indirect rule created classes between these local chiefs and the common Africans. Because local chiefs, they had direct contact with Europeans, they termed themselves as upper class, and they never respected these common Africans. So because of that, there is some time little or small conflict due to these classes or differences. And also classes shown on the life of these local chiefs and the Africans. Because local chiefs they got direct contact with Europeans, they got some of gifts, some of things from Europe. Those things were new to Africans, while common Africans, they got nothing from Europeans. So it created a gap or the classes. Created the blames to local chiefs from Africans. It was indirect, and the local chiefs received the order from Europeans. So when the order is too difficult to be implemented, all of blames were sent to local chiefs and not to Europeans. So Europeans was not part of the game. They are giving you instructions and they're leaving you there. When instructions was difficult to be implemented, those blames come back to local chiefs. So local chiefs blamed enough rather than Europeans, because Africans trusted their leaders and they assumed that all those issues are coming from their leaders without knowing that were the orders from Europeans. It was active only in centralized states like Nyamwezi, Buganda, and Hausa. In those decentralized states, the state that are so scattered, there is no one leader or one figure of administration. It was difficult to be implemented comparing to the area where there is centralized state. This is the weakness because some of the area there were no centralized state, so it was difficult to be implemented. How direct rule was? Indirect rule. Prove indirect, it was indirect. We can prove the indirect of indirect rule by checking the following. Number one, British used local rulers in supervising the economic activities. So in administration, it was indirect because blacks worked on behalf of Europeans. That's number one. Local chiefs worked on behalf of Europeans. Number two, Local rulers were given authority to provide punishment on behalf of whites. Also, another element or another feature of indirect, it is when Africans punish the Africans, and that punishment, it was authority from above. So when African chiefs punishing Africans, it was that punishment come directly from white, but the one who implementing were Africans, so it's showing indirect. African leaders were involved in solving disputes. Also, Africans leader given authority to solve conflicts. British used local chiefs at the bridge of conveying orders from above. Thus, the order sound indirectly from British. Very, very open. Those orders brought down to the Africans by using messenger. Those were African chiefs. So when the African chiefs brought there, and we don't see white in provision of that orders, that to the meaning of indirect. It was indirect because the system shifted all of blames to African local chiefs. As we said before, all of blames, when the instructions were difficult to be implemented, all of blames went back to African chiefs and not Europeans. That is indirect. How indirect it was indirect. Then how indirect was direct? Some of scholars, they said there is element of direct rule or direct administration in indirect. The direct of indirect are seen in the following areas. Number one, order came from whites, so that is direct. Order never made up by Africans, that is direct. High ranks dominated by whites, as I said before, even from German, all high ranks, it was by whites. No black was at the top. Application of coercive apparatus, the use of military, the use of police, the use of court or judicial. These coercive apparatus were applied to make sure the system was implemented. Based on racial segregation, and this racial segregation you can see on the positions offered. Africans were given low positions, and also the benefit, financial benefit. Africans were given less financial benefit and industrial services comparing to white. Destroyed the African culture directly. How? When local chiefs contacted with Europeans, they used the English language, not the vernacular language. Although at the beginning missionaries were used as a translator, but later on Africans leaders slowly they start to understand English language, and then they went to spread that English language to their people. So slowly they started stopping with their vernacular language and they adapted a new language, and that is destruction of culture. So this the way how indirect rule looked like direct rule. The differences between two systems, direct and indirect. Let's check how these two systems were differ. Number one, they were differ on who practiced it. Direct rule, it was by German, indirect rule by British. Number two, they were differ. Direct rule was harsh and cruel, while indirect rule was friendly. As we check, the African chiefs were treated somehow good, not like Jumbe Liwali and Akida, they are in direct rule, and also in direct rule of German, we saw German were very harsh directly to Africans, comparing in indirect of British, while the local chiefs were implementing the orders because they know or they were familiar with those people who were governing. Sometimes it was friendly, they were not harsh. Direct rule used the Liwali, Akida and Jumbes, while indirect rule used the local chiefs. The difference is these Liwali, Akidas and Jumbes were appointees. They appointed by Germans, while these local chiefs were present before coming of white. Direct rule created much African resistance due to the harshness and the direct involvement of whites, while indirect rule reduced the resistance. The time Germany thought that they are reducing resistance, the time resistance keep go up, and most of this resistance were passive resistance. Africans, they never shown direct or active resistance, especially after failure in resisting establishment of colonialism. So after establishment of colonial rule, Africans and the German showed passive resistance because of the cruelty of German administrators, while in indirect it was difficult to resist your local chiefs. That's why in indirect under British there were low or no resistance comparing to the direct rule that were cruelly, and it created high resistance. Indirect rule created a puppet leader, while direct rule no, because there's no there is direct involvement of Africans and Europeans. In indirect rule, those African chiefs, some of them they went extra mile, they became puppet leaders to Europeans, and this became the challenge during struggle for the independence or nationalism struggle, because some of African chiefs they were seen, or they saw the system having whites in Africa, it was a benefit. They enjoyed the presence of Africans in a presence of white in Africa. Why? Because they used to receive some of small gifts and some of benefit from Europeans or British because of indirect rule. So some of Africans later became puppet, while in direct under German there were no room of puppet leaders. Why do we need a leader while Germans were direct in the colony? These were the differences between these two systems. Very, very important, this part of differences. Why British used the direct rule in Zimbabwe? Why British used the direct rule in Zimbabwe? As we said, British generally applied indirect rule in Africa, in many colonies. But in few colonies, because of some circumstances, she applied the direct rule. And the case study here today is Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe or Southern Rhodesia, British applied the direct rule. Why? Desire of British to have full control of Zimbabwe economy. Zimbabwe was blessed with a very gifted land, very big size of land and fertile land. So to have that control of that land, British opted to have direct rule. The role of British South Africa Company, Bisako and Cecil Rhodes, that company played a great role to have direct control of the colony. Loss of trust of African chiefs. Europeans never trusted again African chiefs, especially after the resistance and introduction of colonial law. Presence of many settlers in Zimbabwe. There were a high number of settlers, and the presence of these settlers simplified the system of governing. And the last, favorable climatic conditions for the settlement of whites. The conditions there in Zimbabwe, it was not harsh or bad for the European to settle. That's why many Europeans settled in Zimbabwe, and it was easy to apply direct rule. So after saying so, the third administrative system is assimilation policy. The third one is assimilation policy. Remember, the first, it was direct rule under German. The second it was indirect rule under British. And the third one today is assimilation policy. Assimilation policy, this was an administrative system used by France. That's number one, used by France or French people. And the main meaning of this assimilation policy, it was to change African people to look like Frenchmen. The third way, the assimilation, look alike, to assimilate people to look alike Frenchmen. So they were Africans, but they're supposed to look like French citizens or French people. And the French applied this in one of our colony, that it was Senegal, and mainly from those 4 provinces, that is Dakar, Gorée, Saint Louis, and the Rufisque. These 4 provinces were the main provinces affected with assimilation policy. Remember, we said assimilation, it was to transform or to change Africans, not in skin color, but the lifestyle, the culture, how to look like. They support to look like French. So eating style like French, wearing style like French, speaking language, speak French language, and the other area of life they were supposed to resemble with the French people. That is the meaning of assimilation policy. So in the assimilation policy, as we checked, it is supposed it wanted the Africans to look like French. Then France government created some of conditions for those who wanted to be French men, and these were conditions for someone to be assimilated. Number 1, must practice monogamy. Here in monogamy means that to marry one wife, not polygamy as we used in our African tradition. One wife, and also so to be Catholic follower, Roman Catholic follower, Christianity. Number 2, must be adult, more than 18 years old, and Christian in faith. So age and the religion, age is 18, and so to be Christian. Number 3, if you want to be assimilated, must have passed and qualified military service of more than 1 year and above, 1 year and above military service. Another condition, it was must abandon their culture and adapt to French culture. So you should declare that from today I'm no longer in African culture, I'm starting following French culture, language, wearing style, food, education, all those should be stopped and adopting French culture. Must be fluent in French language, both written and spoken. Make sure you're able to use French language, speaking and writing. Born in one of our West African province. If you're born or you are coming from those 4 provinces I mentioned before, from Senegal, Dakar, Gorée, Saint Louis, and Rufisque, then you can be assimilated. Mean that if you're coming out of those provinces, you cannot be assimilated. These were the conditions set by France to assimilate Africans, from Africans to French citizens. Why assimilation? Number 1, to spread the French culture. As the more people are starting practicing your culture, then you are spreading your culture. So more Africans, or most of Africans, became French and they acquired French culture. French termed Senegal as he oversees province or colony. So because of this status of the colony, France wanted to make Senegal or Senegalese to look like French people, because he believed Senegal the part of our country. Wanted to reduce the resistance by converting Africans as French. Once you converted to be French, you are a French citizen. It is difficult to resist against your country. So before you were African and you was resisting French system or French government, then you changed it from Africans to French. Once you are French, how can you go against France government? So it was easy to minimize resistance by turning these people from one side to another side. Create African French labor to get some of cheap labor who will work under French government. Because of French Revolution, French Revolution believed in equality, liberty, and fraternity. So because of that policy or that statement, French said, let us treat Africans the way we are treating French people there in France. So they wanted to create a line of equality. But unfortunately, this policy failed. Assimilation policy failed. It was not successful like other administrative system. And before going to the what happened after the failure of this one, let's check why assimilation policy failed. It was failed because of this. Number one, resistance from Muslim Africans. Remember the conditions. Among of the condition, it was you saw to be Christian, and this it applied mainly in West Africa. And in West Africa, most of countries in West Africa were affected with the Islamic religion, and that is because of trans-Saharan slave trade. During trans-Saharan slave trade, most of West Africa people, they adopted the Islamic religion. So when white coming, they came for colonialism, they found that place already affected with the Islamic. So it was difficult, a very big challenge to convert these people who had their own faith to another faith. That's why at the end it failed. Monogamic condition. We as Africans, we know our grandfathers, they were used to have more than one wife. And why more than one wife? There are so many factors, but mainly towards wealthy status and also to get laborers who will work to their farms. So when French said you're supposed to have one wife, while before that people used to have more than one wife, polygamy, it was difficult for the Africans to abandon polygamy and go to monogamy. It was the challenge. Expensiveness of the system. The system, it was expensive because after converting African to be French, these Africans, they're supposed to receive the same services like whites. Education, quality education, housing, and some of them, they got even scholarship. They went to study and live there abroad or there in France. So it was expensive to accommodate or to treat these Africans who changed or shifted from Africans to French system or French culture. No support from missionary schools. Most of missionary schools, they were beyond or out of the system of supporting or educating Africans to be like French. They never wanted most of Africans to become French citizens. Resistance from French people. These French people, they complain like we are the taxpayer of the French government, and unfortunately our tax is going to be used to change Africans to be French. This is not good. And also they got fear like we are going to have many Africans, and when we are going to have many Africans, there is a day these Africans, they can overthrow us. They can take our country, they can take our government, and they have to be slaves. So because of these two fears, embezzlement of taxes from French people and increased number of black in the French country or in the French government, it created a resistance from French people. They want to defend themselves. So after assimilation policy failed, French government came down and come up with another system, that is association policy. This was a replacement of assimilation policy. It intended to treat Africans equally without being a French citizen. So here in assimilation policy, things changed. France government of French people recognized or respected the African culture, African system of life, and stopped disturbing the cultural system rather than controlling Africans. Assimilation policy was successful to convert many Africans who became French citizens. Thus, it created a fear to the French government for having more blacks French citizens, as I said before. So because of this fear, assimilation policy failed, and the association was the solution to have everyone should live his or her life. Live your culture, let me live my culture. So why association policy? To reduce learning cost, no more sponsorship, no more good education, no more good life to those who were French citizens. Let Africans live their life. It was difficult to exploit African French citizens. Another problem it was here. Once you converted the Africans to be citizens of French or France, how can you exploit again your citizens? Let's say example, Dakar or Gori. All people of Dakar, remember Dakar is Senegal area. All people of Dakar are black French, those who are assimilated. And then Dakar, there is resources. How come you go and exploit those resources in the place where your citizens are living? That is extraordinary, like exploiting your family. So it was difficult to exploit those French African citizens. That's why they said, yeah, stop this. Let Africans be Africans and us French people. Resistance from French taxpayers. That assimilation policy needed high budget to be implemented, as I said before. And also African chiefs protected their cultural values. Most of African chiefs created a resistance to Europeans, those French people, because they wanted to protect their cultural values, especially the issue of polygamy. Then those from direct, indirect, and assimilation, those were administrative systems. But this administrative system accompanied by this colonial military and legal institutions. In bracket, we used to call them cohesive apparatus. These were the system, the organs help the administrative systems to run properly. This referred to the colonial cohesive apparatus used in the colonial era by colonialists. After imposing colonial administrative systems, there was a need to have the organ that will suppress any African resistance against the state, and the organ that will enforce colonial rule. So cohesive apparatus, colonial military and legal institutions, they were set mainly to avoid or to suppress African resistance and to implement the interest of the colonial masters or colonial government. Currently, I can say these security organs we have in the country, judicial system, and maybe parliament, all these things are working together to make sure executive implement what they want. So even before that, direct rural, indirect rural, assimilation policy, it was supported by colonial military and legal institutions. Colonial military referred the armed forces that was under colonial government, include army, police, and the prison. Both Africans and Europeans were included in the force. Here we have example of those colonial military. Example, CAL, King African Rifles, and the Royal West African Frontier Force, the RWFF. These were examples of military forces during colonialism. When we get time, we go and read more. Let's check the functions of colonial military. The functions of this apparatus, it was simple: to provide security to the colonial administrators from any threat, like internal and external. So all colonial officers were protected by this colonial military. And why? They had the experience of African resistance, so they learned the lesson. Involved in protecting colonial economy, like paying tax, involving in agricultural and the building infrastructure. Also, these people who were in the military, some of them involved in building infrastructure of the colony, like railways, houses, and some of them they were involved as laborers in agriculture, and the others they were involved in supervising collection of taxes. Protecting colonial government interest. Anyone who seems to go against colonial government, he was terminated by military force, colonial military force. Protecting imperialist interests in different wars. So whenever there is war, example, in WW1, some of colonial military officers from East Africa, German East Africa and Tanganyika, they went to fight on behalf of German. And the same even from Kenya, some of them they went to fight on behalf of British. So to protect the imperialist interest in the different wars. When your boss is in war, you're supposed to protect your boss. So it happened during that time. Another functions, collecting information for strengthening colonial government. So sometimes they were secret informers of the colonial government. They collect different informations, secret way to protect the interest of the colonial government. And the last one, suppressing African resistance. Somehow it is surprising. Your fellow Africans are resisting, and you are stopping them. Something like it is awkward. It's like vice versa. Your fellow Africans are resisting to get independence or to get their political freedom, and you, Africa, you are stopping them, stop resisting just because of the whites. Something ridiculous. So these were the functions of colonial military. By saying so, thank you for watching. That was a presentation of colonial administrative system, the second topic of Form 3, and you was with me, Mr. Shadrach Swiller from Classroom TZ. Thank you for choosing Classroom TZ. Get it close with it for the more topics.